She leaned toward her parents at my dinner table and whispered in Mandarin, "This old fool is clueless. He's so dumb." She thought I couldn't understand her. She thought I was just a 8-year-old widower in suburban Virginia who fixed broken radios and burned pot roast on Sundays. She was wrong. The scent of rosemary and slow-cooked beef filled my dining room that night. My son Daniel sat beside her, glowing like a man who'd just won the lottery of love. Across from me was his fiancée Lily Chen, all soft smiles and polite nods. She'd brought peonies, complimented my home, called me Mr. Walker in that sweet, honeyed tone that would fool anyone. Then she leaned slightly to her right, toward the two people she'd introduced as her parents, and switched languages. Her voice dropped just enough to seem private. "This old fool is clueless. He doesn't understand a thing. Keep smiling." Her mother hid a smirk behind her teacup. My grip tightened around my fork, because I understood every word. What Daniel didn't know, what no one in this house knew, was that I'd spent nearly 2 decades in Army intelligence, much of it assigned to East Asia operations. Mandarin wasn't foreign to me. It was muscle memory. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just disrespect. This was strategy. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? What city? What country? And if you've ever had someone underestimate you at your own table, I want to hear that too. Because what happened next changed my son's life forever. I didn't confront her that night, because the most dangerous predators only reveal themselves when they feel safe. I forced my expression to stay neutral. I even chuckled at something Daniel said about their spring wedding plans. Lily kept playing her part flawlessly. She asked about my late wife with just the right amount of softness. She praised the roast. She touched Daniel's arm at exactly the right moments. But once you know someone is acting, the performance becomes obvious. Her smile never reached her eyes. Her father avoided specifics when I casually asked what part of Shanghai they were from. Her mother hesitated half a second too long before mentioning the year they immigrated. Small cracks, hairline fractures, and a porcelain mask. Daniel was glowing. That was the hardest part. He talked about cherry blossoms for engagement photos, about how Lily inspired him to think bigger, to travel more, to invest differently. Invest differently. I stored that phrase away carefully. When dessert ended, Lily switched back to English, all sugar again. "Mr. Walker, I hope we can do this every month. Family is everything to me." Family. The word almost made me laugh. Because family doesn't whisper instructions across the table. Family doesn't test whether the old man understands. As they stood to leave, Daniel hugged me tightly. "Dad, thank you for giving her a chance." I hugged him back, and I made a silent promise. I would give her exactly the chance she thought she had won. Then I would see who she really was. The house felt different after they left. Quieter. Colder. I stood at the kitchen sink staring into the dark backyard, replaying every syllable Lily had spoken in Mandarin, not just the insult, the instruction. Keep smiling. As if the two people at my table were employees, not parents. That detail bothered me more than the name she called me. Predators test boundaries first, then they escalate. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my workshop with coffee, grinning like a teenager. "Lily loved last night, Dad. She said she feels so accepted here." Accepted. I studied my son carefully. He looked lighter, happier than I had seen him in years. After his mother passed, something in him had dimmed. Lily had turned the light back on. That terrified me. "Son," I said carefully, "how well do you really know her family?" His smile faded just a fraction. "What do you mean?" "Just conversation, stories, details. Sometimes people present versions of themselves." His jaw tightened. "Dad, please do not start. I know what this is about. You think she is using me." I did not answer immediately. Silence can reveal more than accusation. He leaned forward. "Is this because she is Chinese?" That hit harder than the insult. "No," I said evenly. "It is because I trust my instincts." He shook his head, disappointed. "Lily warned me this might happen." "Warned you?" "Yeah. She said sometimes parents struggle when their sons grow up." I felt it then. The first clear sign. She had already positioned me as the enemy. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face when he said she warned him. That was not love. That was preemptive defense. She had planted doubt before I even opened my mouth. That is how manipulation works. You do not fight the enemy head on. You poison the well first. By morning, I had made my decision. If I confronted her without proof, I would lose my son. If I stayed silent, I might lose him forever. So I chose a third option. I would verify everything. I still had contacts from my years in military intelligence. Men and women who now worked in federal agencies, background analysis, immigration review. I had not asked them for favors in decades. But this was not about pride. It was about protecting my child. That afternoon, I made a call to an old colleague who owed me nothing, yet answered on the second ring. I asked for something simple: quiet background verification, identity confirmation, employment records, immigration history. Nothing illegal, just facts. Facts do not argue, facts do not shout. Facts end lies. When I hung up, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief. Not yet. Resolve. If you have ever had to become the villain in someone's story just to protect them, tell me in the comments. Did they understand later, or did it cost you the relationship? And if you believe instincts matter, hit like and stay with me. Because what I learned about Lily was far worse than an insult. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6:12 inches the morning, and the tone in my old colleague's voice told me everything before he even spoke. He did not waste time. The name Lily Chen did not match the social security number she provided to her employer. The original owner of that identity had died 18 months ago in California. The death certificate was legitimate. The woman sitting at my dinner table was not. Her real name was Lin Xiaoyu. She had entered the country on a student visa that expired 2 years ago. Since then, she had been linked to 2 short engagements, both to American men. Both ended abruptly when questions about documentation surfaced. My chest tightened. This was not coincidence. It was pattern. Then came the part that made my hands go cold. The couple she introduced as her parents were not related to her. They were part-time performers, registered with a local cultural events agency. They had been paid for private appearances before, including immigration, photo packages. I asked one question. Is there a legal spouse overseas? There was a pause. Yes. Married 3 years ago in Guangzhou. No divorce on record. I thanked him and ended the call. For a long moment, I just sat there in my quiet kitchen, staring at the wall where my wife's photograph hung. Daniel was planning a wedding to a woman already married, and if he signed those papers, he could be implicated in federal fraud. This was no longer about insult. This was about survival. I did not call Daniel immediately. If I accused her now, he would defend her harder. Love under attack does not retreat, it fortifies. So I made another call, this time to a federal contact who specialized in immigration fraud investigations. I provided the documentation quietly. Identity mismatch, expired visa, existing marriage, overseas. Paid actors posing as parents. There was silence on the line, then a slow exhale. This is bigger than your family situation, he said. If this is accurate, she is committing multiple federal crimes. Can you move carefully, I asked. My son is unaware. We always prefer cooperation over spectacle. But if she continues the fraud, arrest is inevitable. After I hung up, I finally called Daniel. Son, I owe you an apology. The pause was cautious. For what? For judging Lily too quickly. I would like to have dinner again, just the 4 of us. Fresh start. Relief flooded his voice. Dad, that means everything. She has been worried you hate her. I swallowed that irony. Tell her I want to understand her better. When the call ended, I sat alone at the kitchen table. This next dinner would not be about acceptance. It would be about exposure. If you think confronting someone without proof only makes you lose credibility, let me know in the comments. Would you have told your son immediately, or waited for undeniable evidence like I did? Stay with me, because what happened at that second dinner made her freeze in a way I will never forget. Friday night arrived crisp and quiet, and I was wearing a wire under my sweater when I opened my front door to my son's smiling fiance. Lily stood there, radiant, holding a bouquet of white lilies, as if the universe enjoyed irony. Behind her, the hired parents wore polite expressions, polished to perfection. Daniel looked hopeful. That almost broke me. Come in, I said calmly. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and slow-cooked beef again. I had recreated the first dinner, intentionally. Familiarity lowers defenses. That was lesson one in counterintelligence. Federal agents were stationed 2 houses down. A surveillance van sat discreetly on the corner. Everything was legal, everything documented. Dinner began smoothly. Lily laughed at my stories. She asked thoughtful questions about my time in the army, though she did not know how close she was to the truth. Her performance was flawless. Too flawless. Halfway through dessert, she leaned toward her parents again. Not as bold as before, just enough. She switched to Mandarin. He looks calmer tonight. I told you he would fold. After the wedding, we pushed the paperwork quickly. That was enough. I set down my fork gently. Then I answered her in Mandarin. Did you really believe I would not understand you? The blood drained from her face. Daniel froze. Her father's hand trembled. And in that silence, the mask cracked for the first time. What happened next ended everything. Daniel looked between us, confused. Dad, what did you just say? I kept my eyes on Lily. I asked her if she truly believed I did not understand her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I continued in English now, calm and precise. Or should I call you Lin Xiao Yu? The name hit her like a physical blow. Daniel's chair scraped loudly against the floor. What is he talking about? I reached into the folder beside my plate and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of identity records, visa documents, and a marriage certificate from Guangzhou. You entered this country on a student visa that expired 2 years ago, I said evenly. You assumed the identity of a deceased American citizen, and you are legally married. That is a lie, she snapped, finally finding her voice. He is trying to destroy us because he cannot control his son. Her so-called father stood abruptly. This is outrageous. We are leaving. Sit down, I said quietly. You are registered performers with East Coast Cultural Events. $500 per appearance. Daniel's face went white. Lily reached for him. Baby, please listen to me. None of this is what it looks like. The doorbell rang. Right on time. 2 federal agents entered, badges visible. Lin Xiaoyu, you are under investigation for immigration fraud and identity theft. She turned toward me, hatred replacing sweetness. You set me up. Yes, I did. And for the first time, she had nothing left to say. The moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, my son's entire future shattered in front of me. Daniel stood frozen, staring as the woman he planned to marry struggled against federal agents in my dining room. This is entrapment, she screamed. He tricked me. No one tricked you, the lead agent replied calmly. We documented everything. Her hired parents collapsed into silence almost instantly. The man muttered that they were paid actors. The woman began crying, insisting they did not know the full extent of the scheme. Lily turned to Daniel one last time. Tell them you knew. Tell them we are in love. Daniel's voice came out hoarse. Were you ever going to tell me you were married? She said nothing. That silence was louder than any confession. The agents escorted her toward the door. As she passed me, she dropped the sweetness completely. You think you won, old man. I met her eyes steadily. I think I protected my son. The front door closed behind them. The house felt hollow. Daniel sank into his chair, staring at the empty space where she had been minutes earlier. The engagement ring on his finger suddenly looked like evidence instead of promise. I moved toward him carefully. He held up his hand. Not yet, Dad. And I understood. Because sometimes saving someone does not feel like rescue. It feels like loss. And I did not know if I had just saved my son or broken him. The house stayed silent long after the patrol car lights faded from the street. Daniel remained seated at the table, elbows on his knees, hands gripping his hair like he was trying to hold his world together. The untouched dessert sat between us, cold and forgotten. Finally he spoke. How long did you know? 2 weeks, I answered honestly. I suspected the first night. I confirmed 3 days ago. He let out a hollow laugh. 2 weeks. I was picking wedding venues while you were building a case file. If I had told you without proof, you would have defended her, I said quietly. He did not deny it. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from her number. He stared at it before reading aloud. I did love you. I just needed this to work. Needed what to work? He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was something no father wants to see. Was any of it real? I did not answer immediately. Because sometimes truth is complicated. Maybe she felt something. But feelings do not erase fraud. They do not cancel marriage certificates. They do not excuse manipulation. He pulled the ring off slowly and set it on the table. I called you paranoid, he said. I accused you of prejudice. You were in love, I replied. That is not a crime. He nodded, but the shame remained. I knew the next few days would decide more than just this moment. They would decide whether I still had my son. 3 days passed without a word from Daniel. No calls, no texts, just silence. I threw myself into work at the shop, repairing a cracked amplifier and rewiring an old television that buzzed louder than my thoughts. But every time the doorbell chimed, my heart jumped. On the third night, at 11:43 p.m., my phone rang. Dad. His voice was strained, but steady. I have not slept, he admitted. I keep replaying everything. The dinner, the lies, the way she looked at you when you spoke Mandarin. I listened without interrupting. I defended her against you, he said. I thought you were threatened. I even thought maybe you just could not accept her. I deserve that, I replied softly. I did not give you context. No, he said quickly. You gave me instinct. I chose comfort. There was a pause. Was I really that blind? No. You were hopeful. Hope is not blindness. It is trust without verification. He exhaled slowly. The agents called me today. They confirmed everything. The marriage overseas, the visa fraud. I was never under investigation. I was a target. That word hit him hard. Target. I waited. Dad, can I come by tomorrow? Of course. Another pause. Thank you for not giving up on me. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at my late wife's photo. Sometimes protection looks like betrayal, but sometimes it saves a life before it is ruined. The next evening, Daniel walked into my house carrying takeout containers and an expression I had not seen since he was a boy who had just learned something the hard way. He set the food down and looked at me directly. I need to understand everything, he said. Not just what she did, how you knew. So I told him. I explained the first dinner, the insult in Mandarin, the instruction to keep smiling. I told him about the expired visa, the stolen identity, the legal marriage overseas. I showed him the timeline, the documents, the pattern. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and stared at the ceiling. She called you clueless, didn't she? Yes. He swallowed hard. I thought you were overprotective. I did not realize you were protecting me from prison. That was the first time he used the word prison out loud. I never wanted to control you, I said. I wanted you to choose freely, but I also could not watch you sign a document that could ruin your life. He nodded slowly. I think what hurts most is that I ignored the small things, the rushed paperwork, the vague stories, the way she deflected questions. Instinct is quiet, I said. Manipulation is loud. He met my eyes. Next time, I will listen to the quiet voice. And in that moment, I knew something important. I had not broken my son. He had grown up. If you have ever learned a painful lesson that made you stronger, share it below. Sometimes wisdom is expensive, but it saves you from paying a much bigger price later. 3 weeks later, life began to feel normal again, but it was a different kind of normal. Daniel started coming by the shop every Saturday morning, not because he needed advice, but because he wanted perspective. We fixed a cracked receiver together one afternoon, working in comfortable silence, until he finally spoke. She almost convinced me to move money into a joint account early, he said. Said it would make the visa process smoother. I kept my hand steady on the soldering iron. Did you? No. Something felt rushed. I ignored it because I thought love meant trust without hesitation. Trust should be steady, I replied. Urgency is often a red flag. He nodded thoughtfully. I have been replaying the first dinner in my head. I remember how she leaned toward her parents. I thought it was sweet. Private. Now I see it was coordination. He paused. You know what hurts most. What? I underestimated you. I smiled faintly. That is common. I encourage it. He laughed for the first time in weeks. As he packed up to leave, he stopped at the door. Dad, thank you for being willing to let me hate you if it meant keeping me safe. That sentence settled deep. After he drove away, I stood in the doorway watching the taillights fade into the quiet street. She thought I was a clueless old fool. But what she never understood was this. Experience does not shout. It waits. And when the moment comes, it answers. I thought the story was over until Daniel came to me one evening with something that made my blood run cold again. He placed his phone on the workbench and slid it toward me. It was a message from an unknown number. Tell your father he should have minded his own business. No threats, no profanity, just that. The sender had attached a blurred photo of my house, taken from across the street. Daniel's jaw tightened. The agent said she cooperated, that she gave up names. But what if she was not working alone? That question had been sitting in the back of my mind since the arrest. Patterns like hers rarely operate solo. I picked up the phone and studied the image carefully. The angles suggested someone parked briefly, not long-term surveillance. Amateur intimidation, not professional. Still, intimidation is not random. I made one call to my federal contact. Within hours, they traced the number. It was routed through an online messaging service tied to one of the so-called parents. He had panicked after the fines and was trying to scare us into silence. Cowards often lash out when exposed. By morning, the agency had secured a formal warning against him. The message stopped. Daniel looked at me later that day and said something that told me everything I needed to hear. They thought you were clueless, but they were the ones who underestimated you. No, I said quietly. They underestimated the one thing you can never afford to misjudge. A father who is paying attention. And this time, the silence that followed felt peaceful. A month later, I received one final message from the detention facility that closed this chapter for good. It was a formal notification forwarded through my federal contact. Lin Xiaoyu had signed a full confession as part of her plea agreement. She admitted to identity theft, visa fraud, staged family appearances, and targeting emotionally vulnerable men who came from stable households. Stable households. That detail lingered. Daniel read the document beside me at the kitchen table. His expression did not break this time. It hardened. She chose men with strong fathers, he said quietly. Men who trusted deeply. I nodded. Predators study patterns. They look for warmth. Then they try to wear it. He folded the papers carefully and pushed them aside. You know what she miscalculated. What? She thought I loved her more than I trusted you. That was the first time he said it without hesitation. I felt something settle inside me that had been tense for weeks. Trust is not loud, I told him. It builds quietly over years. It survives storms. He gave a small smile. She called you clueless. Yes. He shook his head. Turns out the only thing you were clueless about was how far you were willing to go for me. That sentence will stay with me for the rest of my life. Because she came into my home believing I was an old fool, but what she met instead was a father who listens carefully and answers when it matters most. The following Sunday, Daniel stayed for dinner without any tension hanging in the air. No hidden microphones. No federal vans down the street. Just 2 plates, quiet conversation, and the kind of peace that feels earned. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. I need to say something clearly, he said. I waited. When she accused you of being prejudiced, I believed her. I used Mom's memory against you. That was wrong. It hurt, I admitted, but I understood where it came from. No, he said firmly. I let someone else define you for me. That will not happen again. That sentence mattered more than any apology. He leaned back and studied me. You knew she was testing you at that first dinner, didn't you? Yes. Why did you not react? Because reaction gives manipulators information. Silence makes them careless. He nodded slowly. She thought you were an old fool. I smiled faintly. Experience looks like foolishness to people who rely on deception. We cleared the dishes together like we used to when he was younger. As he grabbed his jacket, he paused at the door. If I ever have kids, I hope I protect them the way you protected me. That was the real victory. Not the arrest, not the confession, but the lesson that survived. Because in the end, she froze when I answered her in Mandarin. But what truly ended her plan was something simpler. A father who paid attention, and a son who learned to listen. If there is one thing I learned from that night, it is this. Evil rarely announces itself loudly. It whispers, smiles, and waits for you to doubt yourself. Looking back, the insult in Mandarin was never the real threat. Words are easy. Deception is harder to detect. She did not lose because I understood her language. She lost because I understood behavior. Daniel asked me recently if I regret setting her up. No, because love without discernment is vulnerability, and protection without courage is negligence. What happened at my dinner table was not about revenge. It was about responsibility. When you see danger clearly and choose silence out of comfort, you become complicit. I chose discomfort. I chose to let my son question me. I chose to risk being misunderstood. And in the end, the truth did what truth always does. It exposed what performance could not sustain. She thought I was clueless, but the only thing I was unaware of was how far she was willing to go. The night I answered her in Mandarin, she froze. The night federal agents walked her out, she unraveled. But the real victory happened later, when my son looked at me and said, "I trust you." That is the moment that mattered. If this story reminded you to trust your instincts, tell me where you are watching from and share your experience below. And if you believe protecting family is worth temporary conflict, stay with this channel. Sometimes the quietest strength changes everything. The final lesson did not come from a courtroom or a confession. It came months later when Daniel brought someone new to dinner. Her name was Emily. No performance, no exaggerated charm, no rehearsed compliments. She asked simple questions and listened to the answers. When she did not know something, she said so. When I challenged an opinion lightly, she did not deflect. She engaged. After dessert, Daniel walked her to the car. When he came back inside, he studied me carefully. "Well, I took my time. She did not rush you." He smiled. "No, she told me we have time." That was the difference. Manipulation accelerates. Integrity allows space. Daniel leaned against the counter. I paid attention this time, to tone, to timing, to pressure. I asked questions. She answered directly, no deflection. I nodded once. "Good." He hesitated, then said something that closed the circle completely. When she whispered something to her friend earlier tonight, I did not panic. I did not assume. I simply asked what she said, and she told me. Transparency. That was the word Lily could never offer. As Daniel left that night, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt confidence, not in my instincts, in his, because the goal was never to control his future. It was to equip him for it. And now, whether I am at the table or not, he will recognize the difference between sweetness and sincerity, between urgency and love, between performance and truth. The last time I saw her face was not at my dinner table. It was on a courtroom monitor, stripped of every ounce of performance she once wore like perfume. There were no flowers in her hands, no soft voice, no carefully tilted smile, just fluorescent lighting and a federal judge reading charges aloud. Identity theft, visa fraud, conspiracy. She did not look at the camera. Predators rarely like being observed without control. Daniel sat beside me in that courtroom, silent but steady. Months earlier, he would have tried to defend her. That day, he did not move. When the judge asked if she understood the charges, she answered clearly, "Yes, Your Honor." No sweetness, no manipulation, just consequence. Outside the courthouse, Daniel exhaled slowly and looked up at the sky like a man stepping out of a storm cellar after a tornado. "I almost married her," he said. "Yes, you did." He turned toward me. "And she thought you were the fool." I almost smiled. She misread the room. She misread the table. And most of all, she misread what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Weeks later, Daniel hosted dinner at his own place. He invited colleagues, friends, and yes, Emily. The conversation flowed easily. No tension, no rehearsed charm. At one point, someone whispered something across the table in a language Daniel did not speak. He laughed and said calmly, "What did you say?" The man repeated it in English. Simple. Transparent. Daniel caught my eye across the table. No fear, no suspicion, just awareness. That was the real victory. Not the arrest, not the confession, not even the moment she froze when I answered her in Mandarin. The victory was this. My son now knows the difference between love and leverage, between urgency and honesty, between someone who says, "Keep smiling," and someone who says, "Take your time." She walked into my home believing she could script the narrative. She believed she could manipulate the old widower who fixed radios in his garage. She believed she could test me in a language she thought I did not understand. What she never understood was this. Experience listens before it speaks. And when it finally speaks, it ends the performance. If there is a lesson in all of this, It is not about language. It is about instinct. When something feels off, it usually is. When someone rushes your future, ask why. When a whisper sounds strategic, pay attention. Because evil rarely storms through the front door. It sits politely at your dinner table and smiles. And sometimes the only thing standing between your child and disaster is your willingness to be misunderstood. She called me clueless, but the only thing I was unaware of that night was how satisfying it would feel to answer her and watch her freeze. This story is not just about deception at a dinner table, it is about the quiet strength that protects what we love most. First lesson: instinct is earned through experience. When something feels wrong, that feeling is not paranoia. It is your life whispering to you through years of observation. Ignoring it can cost you everything. Second lesson: love without discernment becomes vulnerability. Daniel was not foolish for loving deeply, but love must walk alongside wisdom. Real love does not rush paperwork, hide details, or isolate you from family. It allows space, honesty, and questions. Third lesson: sometimes protecting someone means risking their anger. Being misunderstood for a season is a small price to pay if it saves a lifetime of regret. True courage is choosing responsibility over comfort. If this story moved you, thank you for staying until the very end. Tell me in the comments how you felt about Daniel, about Lily, and about the father's decision. Would you have done the same? Please like and subscribe if you believe stories should teach more than entertain, and watch the next videos on your screen now. There are more real lessons waiting for you on this channel.